Welcome, good evening, welcome to the 50th My Life as Journalism Lecture. 50, 5-0. So, My Life as started in October of 2006 with a war photographer named Moises Samon, who Dean Howie Schneider sent into the teeth of danger. Howie got him held in the prison in Baghdad. I'm putting this all on Howie. You probably couldn't have kept Moises out of there. This is the 50th in the series, and the purpose of the My Life As event, for those of you who haven't been to one before, is to bring news literacy and journalism course lessons to life, and to offer students from any discipline, so I'm speaking to all of you who are not journalism majors, to bring to students from any discipline some sound advice about finding a career that's not just a job. Because uniformly, the people that we recruit to speak are people who have a great deal of passion for what they do. And that seems to be really important to a happy life. So that's what we offer to you, even to non-journalists. We're not trying to convert you, although it wouldn't break our heart if we did. The other thing you should know is that the past speakers in the My Life As series, their talks are on our channel on YouTube, the News Literacy channel. There's about 85 videos of the full-length speeches and then the short parts. Credit is granted in some courses, and the way that happens is you swipe your ID card on the way out with Liz and Christina, and they'll have the little machine, and you'll get recorded that way. We would ask that you silence your cell phones, but we strongly encourage you to tweet using the hashtag MLA, as in My Life As, Nieto, N-I-E-T-O. That's our speaker's last name. Hashtag MLA Nieto. And that way we get a nice live stream from the event. Duration's about an hour and 15 minutes. The format is that our speaker will open with a short talk about her life, and then she and I will sit up here on stage for a short conversation, and then we turn to your questions. There are microphones here, and when I call for you to come up and ask questions, please come up. That's usually the best part of the event. So you hear people talk about victimless crime, right? You've heard people say, oh, well, prostitution is a victimless crime. You know, willing seller, willing buyer. And we had a speaker come and talk about the trade in human flesh that sort of changed a lot of minds about whether that's a victimless crime. And then people say, well, you know, the drug trade is really a victimless crime. You know, people, if they decide they want to get addicted, that's their problem. Tonight's speaker risked death. And I don't say that lightly. Risked death to expose the Mexican drug cartels and their government lackeys in one of the most dangerous cities on earth, Juarez, Mexico. As a reporter for this scrappy little local newspaper, El Diario de Juarez, Sandra Rodriguez Nieto won global awards for courage and integrity in journalism, for persistently chasing the story of Juarez's spiral down into lawlessness. So Juarez sits right across the Rio Bravo from El Paso, Texas. I mean, literally, this is, Sandra just told us this tonight, this is the biggest binational region in the world. Millions of people living right there on the border. The one street crosses the national boundary into the next country. It's really incredible. And in Juarez, drug gangs battle for control of supply and distribution of street drugs that are bound for the biggest street drug market in the world, the United States of America. Since 2008, listen to this number carefully. Juarez is a city of 1 million people. Since 2008, more than 10,000 people have been assassinated in Juarez alone. 10,000 in Juarez alone, making it one of the most, let me say this. In Mexico, more than 66 journalists have been killed in the last, 10 years, which makes it one of the most dangerous countries in the world in which to practice journalism. Hello, news literacy students, can you say power of information? We just finished talking about this question of why people kill over information. So, to pop the mythology surrounding these cartel killings, sitting here safe and sound, in the US, we say, well, it's just gangbangers killing each other, who cares? And so Sandra started looking at murders in Juarez. She built this huge database, and she used the public transparency laws to get documentation on all these killings. And what she found is that most of those being killed were unarmed young teenagers from the poorest neighborhoods. And in only 3% of the cases was there prosecution. 97% of those killers did so with impunity, which is a huge word. So there's El Diario, 100,000 circulation newspaper down in the borderlands. And there's Sandra reporting on this in a newsroom in which two of her colleagues have been killed for the crime of journalism. So she studied communication science at the Autonomous University, which is basically a state university in Juarez. She studied towards a master's degree in journalism from University of Texas, El Paso. She has written 2 books about her experiences in the borderlands, La Guerra por Juarez, which is the war for Juarez, and La Fábrica del Crimen, which is the crime factory. She talks about the economic forces that have made Juarez what it is. So she's received all of these national awards and global awards, including news literacy students, the Daniel Pearl Award. You remember who Daniel Pearl is? She's currently a Nieman Fellow at Harvard, which amounts to a year of being paid to do nada. Harvard pays you to come study at Harvard. You don't have to do the homework. You don't have to take the tests. It's awesome. I did one of these a few years back, and it's great. So what is she doing? She is studying the prophets, Prophets. So we'll talk about that a little bit in our conversation, but I hope you'll join me in welcoming tonight's My Life as speaker, Sandra Rodriguez Nieto.
Thank you so much for having me here. Thanks so much to the Stony Brook University. It's my great, great honor to be here tonight and to talk about my life as a reporter. I'm going to be short. I just want to share 2 basic decisions that I think shape my life and my career as a reporter. The first one is to return to Juarez. Is this sounding good? Okay. As Dean mentioned, I studied communications from 1997 to 1994 to 1997. And as any of you after graduate, I wanted to hit the big leagues, the majors, and I moved to Mexico City, and I found a position first as a copy editor in the biggest and the most important Mexican newspaper, which is Reforma, and then as an investigative reporter in the most important political magazine, which is Proceso. They still are the most important Mexican news outlets. But I wasn't happy because living in Juarez gives you this sense of what is action and what is going outside and see the real life of people struggling with a lot of problems. There was a lot of violence already. You might have heard of these stories of killings of women, which is very controversial because I I felt that it was not just killings of women, it was a killing of people in general. But I was covering politics in Mexico City, and I had an offer from El Diario in 2003 to come back to Juarez and work as an investigative journalist. And after 5 years of working in Mexico City, I considered to go back to my border town. And my friends in Mexico City and Reforma and Proceso, they were like, are you crazy? Are you coming back to this local newspaper? You are already in the national outlets. You may travel all around the nation, covering big national stories. But I just made a bet for a story. And I knew that Juarez had all this complexity that I wanted to understand. I just wanted to understand what was under the surface of a big violence. I felt that the story of my city was not being told. The story of my city was just, oh, it's this place where women are getting killed. I was like, no, that's not the story. That's not just the only story. There is a lot of forces. It's not that city with serial killers. We are not just this city of savages. So I went back, and many of my friends couldn't believe it. So I started to work in El Diario as an investigative journalist, and it's when the happiest years of my life started. Juarez is this border town, as we have mentioned, and relies in this economic model that is empowering the people. The people make $7 per day, the vast majority of the population. And I wanted to find the connections between this economic model and the violence and what was wrong in the institutions, etc. So I started to cover urban development. At that time, there was a massive project to spread the city around the factories, around the transnational factories. And I found out that the local powers, political powers, were making a lot of money around these factories by stretching the city and forcing the people to live in very bad conditions, especially very far away from the rest of the population, with a lot of land, empty land in between. So I spent 3 years writing about this project to open like 36,000 hectares. I don't know how much is an acres, but they opened this new land, which is just sand around factories, and they put their projects, houses. So the people cannot go to the school, send the kids to the school, etc. So I was writing pretty much about this. And then I got into the justice system after I interviewed a kid in 2004. This kid was 16 years old. He killed his entire family, and he got caught. And he killed his family with the help of 2 other kids from his high school. So we interviewed the other kids first, and these other kids told us, to me and another reporter, that Vicente, the kid, convinced them that killing was very easy. And I was like, how come it's easy? How can somebody convince a kid in this town that killing 3 people, drive a truck with 3 dead bodies is easy? And when did we become in this society? So I asked to Vicente, the kid, how did you convince them that killing was easy? And he said, because this is Juarez. And we knew that nobody was going to punish us, basically. And he said, because how many people has been killed in this city, nobody does anything. In that moment, I wrote the interview, but I discovered this concept of impunity and how it works in in the minds of the society. And I started to pretty much cover the justice system, and I create this database that I call the Impunity Index. So every year from 2005 until 2010, I filed these databases with crimes versus prosecution. So with the time, I could sustain with evidence that 97% of cases of crime remain unsolved. I was doing that kind of stories when in 2008, the city became this battlefield for drug cartels who wanted to control the distribution routes of drugs. In January of that year, the federal government sent 8,000 troops to my city. And it was the first time that I see soldiers in my city. For me, it was one of the most impressive images that I have witnessed as a reporter and as a person. And the army was using these Humvees with guns and pointing to the people and doing research, doing searches in houses without judicial warrants, etc. So I wrote a lot about the violations of human rights, etc. So at that point, the violence was just escalating. And in November 13 of that year, my colleague, Armando Rodriguez, who was covering also the dispute for the city, but from another side, from the perspective of the cartels, he got killed. It was the morning of November 13 of 2008, and he was outside of his house with his little daughter, 8 years old, in his car. And some guy just approached and shot him in front of his daughter. And as the rest of the newsroom, I took the second most important decision that I want to share with you, which is I'm not going to give up. We were not scared. And I decided that I want to go further in the coverage of this story. And I have to admit that I did it because I not just because I was angry or because I wanted to honor him, which is pretty much the feeling, but also because I realized that it was a great story. The city was living its most important moment, and I was the investigative reporter in the most important newspaper in the city, so I clearly felt that my responsibility was to cover the story and cover it first. And I used to say first than anyone, which is first than any foreign reporter. And my worst nightmare were like, if someday I wake up and see the story of my city in the New York Times, it's like, no, I'm not going to let any foreign reporter to tell the story of the city that I know, because I know what is underneath the violence. It's not just violence, it's a lot of forces collapsing. It's impunity, it's impoverished an economic model, and all this corruption aspect that I was investigating since years before. So from 2008, I started to cover the story in 3 different ways. I was talking to the students this afternoon, and these different ways were like basically just showing up in the crime scene, trying to find the different stories or the aspects that make every crime different, because every crime has a different story to tell. I was convinced. So I was showing up in every crime scene that I could. I was not the crime reporter, but I was trying to cover beside the daily reporter. And I found out like tons of stories, unbelievable stories. I was just sharing this story of this cemetery of cars of victims. So there is this depository of cars south of the city with 2,000 cars destroyed by bullets. So just by watching that, it's pretty impressive. But that was just one level of coverage. After that, I wanted to push further, and I started to create more databases, and I did these databases with 1,000 homicides of 2008. It's when I found these patterns. I may show you this later. These patterns of where the victims are getting killed most. The whole city is a battlefield, but the violence has very specific geographic patterns. And I found out that it was just basically the poorest parts of the city where all these kids, sons of this maquiladora boom from the 90s, were living without school, without any chances. And other pattern that I found, it was that they were not these drug lords that the Mexican government was saying that were mostly the victims, but these poor kids, young kids below 25 years, and we were losing them by hundreds. Also, relying on transparency laws, I started to look at this, like this story that says there has been thousands of killings, but just 2% of them are being armed while they got killed. That includes police officers. So the vast majority of victims were unarmed when they got killed. So that doesn't answer fully the question of who killed them, but allow us to contrast the official statement that everybody's just drug dealers or gangsters. And I also wrote stories about describing the structures of the two criminal groups in conflict. And this is something that I want to show you. You might have heard this name. The headline says there are 10 police officers, former police officers that works with El Chapo. This story is from the last 2 years, the 2012. And you might have heard recently that this guy has been just arrested the last weekend. El Chapo, supposed to be this drug lord that runs the biggest drug business in the world. And this is his team in Juarez, and so far, until now, I haven't had any news that some of them has been arrested. So I would like to see if this arrest of El Chapo leads to the arrest of the whole structure, and most importantly, of the government, of the officers that were protecting him. And I was doing this every morning without any sense of recognition, any idea that I was going to be here like 4 years later. But I was doing this because I was committed to the story. I was convinced that I was living the most important story that I could live as a journalist until that moment. And I worked as hard as I could. And whenever I was scared, I turned back my life to faith, but also to the idea that doing this gave the meaning to my life. And the lesson that I could share with you is that after this experience, I cannot believe that I'm here, presented as this reporter, while my colleague, Armando, is dead. It's very tough for me to face that because I have been very lucky and he didn't. But I don't like to speak in public, by the way, but if I have some lesson of some experience to share with you, especially with journalism students, is that working hard, believing in the story, and working just for the story, not for glory, not for recognition, it's always pays well. And I wouldn't change any decision that I took. And I might not be here, I might be dead, but I still could take the same decision. So, well, I hope that you may find more answers through the Q&A, but this is pretty much what I wanted to share with.
Thank you for sharing that. One of the things that interests me, we think of Mexico as a very macho culture, and yet all of these badass reporters are women. Why is that?
Well, I don't know, but certainly I have noticed before that in El Diario, we were all women covering the story. My editor was a female reporter. The other girl covering the crime scene, she was a female reporter. The other girl covering, etc. And nationwide, it's the same. It's this Anabel Hernandez, who is the most important reporter writing about El Chapo. I don't know, I think it's a result of this trend of women increasingly participating in the media business, in J schools. But we still don't know the answer, but it's very notorious, yes, certainly.
Very interesting the way that happens. So, in 2010, the editor of El Diario runs a front page letter that says to the cartels, you've killed 2 of our people now. You tell us, what can we report without getting our staff killed? We're just trying to do our job here, and you're killing off our staff. What was the response, both inside and outside, to that? That was a pretty gutsy thing to do.
Well, I may share with you the insights. This editorial ran 2 days after the killing of Luis Carlos Santiago, the intern. He was not my friend, but we were pretty shocked by the killing. Just in difference with the first killing of my friend Armando, in the first case, I understood the logic. He was covering this dangerous beat, but the intern, we didn't know what he did, so we didn't understand. So we went to the funeral. It was terrible. And the next morning, one colleague of mine called me and said, you know, this is not over. I just want you to know that El Diario is going to run an editorial. She knew, she saw the page. I wasn't in the newsroom that day. And she read the headline to me, and I was like, how come El Diario is going to say this? What if they say, okay, everybody's going to be silenced? What if they answer and ask us to turn all the information down? So I was really scared and angry. But when I read the whole piece, I was satisfied when I read this paragraph that says, we are addressing you, the drug lords, because you are the real authority in the state, in the city. It was a way to say the government, you don't count anymore because you are not doing anything. And I felt that it was pretty much the feeling of the city. But still, we gained a lot of attention, and it's when it became kind of the story, which is really uncomfortable. Because we were in the middle of this terrible situation, losing colleagues, some other reporters, losing family, and suddenly every international media outlet was in El Diario, like shooting at us, and they wanted me to go and report in front of the camera. I was like, I don't buy layman stories. How come you want me to do the story in front of your cameras? It was really tough times because we were not trained to deal with this attention and with these requirements. And not just to help reporters, like all the reporters that show up in the newsroom, because I'm also a reporter, so I do this in order to, to be congruent. But it was just very stressful.
So did it change the mood or the feeling of danger among the staff?
At least in my case, yes. That was the worst year for me, and specifically that week, because I knew that if we weren't in the middle of the conflict, now we weren't, openly. And I knew that the government was part of this conflict. And we were challenging, openly telling the government, you don't count anymore. So that put us under the spot. And that's different than just do your work, covering the story, go to your desk, write, and go back to your house. Now we were like under this amount of attention. And I left Mexico City because I wanted to be in my border town, just like doing my stuff. And now I was like in national media. It was very, very stressful.
Yeah. So how do you, when you're covering as many murders as you were covering as a newspaper and you personally as a reporter, when you're covering that many murders, how do you make it new? How do you just keep from saying every day, another death on whatever street?
Well, I was forcing myself. It was a challenge as a reporter. And since I was not the crime beat reporter daily, I was trying to get the most of every crime scene that I was covering. So I was telling this afternoon to the students that I was trying to find different angles rather than just there was another shootout with this victim that is this age or this and this and this, but trying to find like this structural causes behind every story, or this human situation that makes every story every situation absolutely painful. So like this, the story that was before, no, it's okay, thank you. The story that was here before, it was about a family that found out that his son was killed because they found through the GPS that the car was in this depository of cars that had been chopped. And they share with you these stories, and when you find these tiny details that make every crime scene different, they might always end up in the front page because every story, every killing is a loss of a person, and that means a lot for a community.
And the family followed the GPS to this
Cemetery, depository.
This depository that she told us about this afternoon, where there were 2,000 cars riddled with bullet holes that have been involved in these murders. And so they go to this literal auto graveyard and they open the car and there's their son.
They saw the car. The son was already in the morgue.
In the morgue, yeah.
Yep, they found the car, and at that point they were waiting. Let's wait for that somebody stole the car, and that person is the victim. But no, it was the kid.
Yeah. So I'm sorry to the students because this is the easiest question. So I'm stealing the easy one. Again, why go to a place where there's so much violence against reporters? Why stay? Why go back? You're up there in Cambridge, Massachusetts, living the easy life right now. Why go back?
Because if you're a reporter, what do you need? You need big stories. And
that sounds so cold-blooded. Why is that not cold-blooded?
I love the city. I felt the city as my community. I have my house there. I went to college there. And I wanted to understand it as an intellectual challenge. That's why I came back in 2003. When everything was this chaos, I'm not a quitter. I don't imagine myself saying, okay, well, listen, this is very fascinating, but it's too dangerous. It's just not my nature. And it's very painful, it's very dangerous, but I assume myself as a reporter, and this profession is what gives meaning to my life in many, many sense.
What is the payoff for you? You talked a little bit this afternoon about what sort of relationship do you have with the people who are relying on you for reliable information?
I think that's the best recognition that a reporter can have, that the community trusts you and they find you as this person that they can tell the story, they can share the story with you, and they trust that you're gonna tell what they told you, and that builds a sense of community. I mean, working in a local newspaper gives you so much sense of the community because you are reporting in the streets, and suddenly you show up in some store, and in Juarez, everybody had El Diario in their houses, and they recognize the quality of the work that you are doing. And when I was doing the presentation of my book, there were these scholars from the city telling me that you are our journalist. And I'm sorry, but I may have these global awards, but that recognition of my community is the best reward that you can have, that you are doing something that is meaningful and important for the community, and they can see themselves through your work.
Part of what you did was to go and observe at the scene that not everybody could go to and tell them what happened today in your city. Part of what you did was this process that you called gathering all of this and analyzing this data. And then part of it was exposing.
These guys? Actually, I would like to change this.
You don't like these guys looking over your shoulder. Okay.
I'm sorry.
So what is the power of that exposure? What is it about secrets? Like, what is it about making those guys public that's so important to people and to a community?
Because I think that this is a way to expose that organized crime cannot exist without the protection of the state or the government. They cannot run this big enterprise by themselves. And I never believed that the government didn't know where these guys are. I mean,
Right.
For instance, this story, the headline says, in one day, El Flaco, which is another Sinaloa Cartel guy, registered 14 properties in one day. And you
Registered means he bought them.
he registered, he went to the office and put it under his name.
Okay, right.
And you know who was the notario? Who was the person in the office? The Secretary of the State. That's the story. That's what the story says.
Wow. So the people at the very top, the Secretary of State is an important officer for registering documents.
And when
that person registered those.
Yes, and when the person in the other city where the state government is, asked to this guy, to this secretary, about this story, he said, well, I register a lot of properties. How can I know? So,
but El Flaco is a really big name.
And it's an operation of 50 million pesos, which is like $5 million in one day. And by the way, to the name of one kid, who is his kid. Yeah. That's kind of not normal in Mexico.
So what is the effect of making that secret
public
known on the front page of the paper?
That's the worst part. The effect is nothing.
Talk about that. Does that hurt?
Is that good?
Does it hurt? When you expose this big story
It's just frustrating that you can expose these people and seems like the country doesn't change. The other story is talking about a former police head that is saying that the governor ordered him to protect the cartel. The Juarez cartel. And it was there, published with my name. This doesn't have my name. But they're still there. This guy, this Reyes Baeza, the former governor, now has a national position. And
nothing happened.
Nothing happens. And he might be arrested for some media saying, hey, what happened in Chihuahua? People said that you protect the Juarez cartel, but he's, no, well. So, as far as there is no prosecution at all from the state, it's very difficult from journalism. We can expose them, and I think that's pretty much our job. But it's very frustrating that nobody falls, nobody gets caught.
But do you think it's true that there's been no change or slow change?
I am 40 years old, and I haven't seen any advance in my country in my entire life. Just the opposite, which is pretty scary.
So why keep doing it?
Because as journalists, okay, let me answer in this way. I came to Harvard looking for ways to improve my journalism in order to change my country. I had this idea that journalism can turn into change, which is pretty much what we pursue. But now, I just realized that my work is just be a witness, be as this prophet that you are not avoiding, you are not saving your country from disaster, but you are telling them that disaster is coming and why that disaster is coming. And I think that's very important because at least somebody's going to tell the truth, or what we think is the truth. At least somebody is going to.
So your allegiance is more to just getting the story right,
Right.
bearing witness. That's more important, or more, that has to be more gratifying than actually wreaking change
Well, that's
on your country.
my approach to journalism. There are like a lot of reporters trying to go or do this advocacy journalism, etc. And I think it's up to every human nature. I would love to change my country and change the world. That's what we all want. But if you focus your life and do that, you may become very frustrated or lose yourself in the way. So I had to be very realistic, and not just realistic, but humble at some level, and be happy with the idea that I'm a journalist, and being a journalist is a lot.
You have to be happy with the fact that you're not changing the world.
But you are telling.
You are just doing what you can do well, and you have to have the humility to accept that.
Yes.
So what are you studying right now at great and grand Harvard? What are you studying to help you adopt that attitude?
Well, all my colleagues, the Nieman Fellows, are in the MIT Media Lab, which is super cool. I mean, no offense, it's a great place. They're trying with these technologies, with these platforms to create georeferential maps, etc., which is super cool. And I might be the only one that is going to divinity school to study the 8th century prophets.
So let me say this again in case you missed that. All of the other Nieman Fellows are pursuing the most modern media and how to use that to tell the news. She's going 180 degrees backwards, studying the prophets of ancient Israel.
Yes. And when my
Why?
fellows asked me, I said, well, I wanted to find the reason to keep on doing what I do, because in Mexico it requires so much effort and so much, but sometimes you get lost in this dilemma. Why do I do what I do? It's pretty much what you are asking me. And through studying this, I just realized that I may not save my country of disaster, as I said, but somebody has to stand up and tell the king what's wrong with the country. And I think that's pretty much what journalism should be.
So these are not pleasant questions, but I want to try and think about the everydayness of what you've been doing. How many dead bodies do you think you've seen?
Oh. Maybe hundreds, maybe not thousands, but
Hundreds.
probably.
And you yourself knew that you were on a hit list at one point. What was the response in the newsroom to that information? What did you guys do when somebody who worked as a journalist but was on the payroll of the cartels said, by the way, there's a list and you're on it? What was the response?
It's very sad because I just could tell to my colleagues in El Diario, 4 years of war, 2 dead reporters, and we still don't know how to protect ourselves, like nothing. And we were working in this environment with this sense of unprotection because it's pretty much the case. We took like these measures of no byline stories, but the thread said, even when you don't byline, we know who's writing what. Because Sandra's the investigative reporter and the other girl is the crime scene reporter. And we pretty much forced the direction of the Diario to try to call the police and ask them, what do you know about this, etc. But I was sharing with my Nieman fellows this story. We were not cynical, of course not, but we were pretty much used to the violence and to the idea that we may die in any day. So we had this normal morning conversations like, I saw a car this morning and I told my wife, get out of the car because somebody might be, that's one of my colleagues. And that kind of conversations led to some other comments like, guys, I don't want any politician in my funeral if I get killed, etc., etc. So everybody was accepting the idea that we all may get killed.
What we call dark humor, black humor.
Yeah, a lot of black humor.
Soldier humor.
Yeah, I don't know if it would be proper to share with you all the jokes that we were having at that time.
Try us.
All right. It's kind of embarrassing, but my colleague Lucy, who covered the crime scene daily, he used to ask me this question about my underwear. And she said, do you have a matching underwear? Because if you got killed, I don't want to write the story that because the press release described you everything. And that was the joke. I don't want to describe you as this person that doesn't have this matching underwear. So save me that shame. And we had these jokes like every day. So that day when she came to my desk with this pale face saying, let's grab a coffee. She's not my best friend, so she never invited me to grab coffee. And I knew that something was going on. So we were heading to the cafeteria for the coffee, and she said, do you already have your matching underwear? And I said,
do you already have your matching underwear?
And I said, what happened? I didn't laugh that time because I saw her face. And she said, well, I wanted to be calm, but somebody told me, this person told me that there's a hit list and we both are in the list. And they know that despite that we don't byline stories, they know what you write and what I write. And I was taking my coffee and I said, okay, what else do you know, etc. And at the end we were like, we should buy matching underwear, but that was it. That was it. It was, and you go to your house just thinking that might be the last day of your life and you better do something meaningful with your life because it was not just reporters. It was
you better do something meaningful with your life because what?
Because you may die the next day. And not just reporters, but the whole population in the city. At the beginning, the feeling in the city was that this war was just among drug cartels. But with the months, we learned painfully that it was touching everybody. Not just poor kids, but lawyers, journalists, professors. So we had this idea, like the whole city, I think, that we had this idea that life was very fragile.
So what did you think when you heard the news that Guzman had been arrested this weekend? Just in case you don't know, El Chapo Guzman, Shorty Guzman, is the biggest cartel, the leader of the biggest cartel in the world. They deliver incredible percentage of the street drugs that make it to the United States. His net worth is billions. Forbes magazine lists him as one of the most powerful people, not criminals, people in the world because of the size of this economic machine. So what did you think when you saw Guzman had been finally arrested? He escaped jail 12 years ago.
I was kind of waiting for this because, in my understanding, his political time was up. I mean, the administration changed, the party changed, the party in power in the presidency changed. And right now, I have no evidence to say that they were protecting him, the former administration, but I saw that they were not chasing him as they were chasing the other cartel. And my reaction was, we have done this kind of arrest before, and nothing changed because they are just one piece in the whole organization that is pretty much relying in protection of the state. So I will say I want to wait for the other people to fall, and specifically for the politicians that protect him, because they are the people who is seriously damaging our society, because in order to protect this business, they are quitting other responsibilities. They are not prosecuting crime at all. So I would like to see what else are we going to see, and I would like to see if they seize his money, which I doubt. So I will love to see in a month or in 3 months, write this story that after 3 months of the arrest, what happened. So.
Okay, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 students, and about 15 minutes. Pardon? Yeah, we would do a database. You have a minute per student, so it's a lightning round.
All right.
And less every second. So short questions, one question, you, of all people, one question, and away we go.
All right. Thank you for being here.
Thank
The story is great. Quickly, do you think that there is an equivalent to the drug cartels in the United States?
There is an equivalent.
An equivalent.
That's what we all, the Mexican reporters, would like to know. And when American reporters ask us what they can do for us, we just to answer, try to investigate how the drugs business organized in this side of because the drugs don't walk by themselves, of course.
Okay, over this.
Okay, so I got to do this fast. First, I would like to thank you I'd like to start by thanking you for working as a journalist and for putting your profession first and your life second. It's really inspirational and it's an honorable thing. Thank you so much for coming. So my question would be, do you think that in order to fix this problem, it should be a government thing only, it should be a government solution only, a people solution only, an international solution only, or a mix of the three?
I think that should be another approach to drugs in the whole continent. We cannot keep on fighting this product because it's like in the Prohibition times, they were fighting against whiskey and create all this illegal business that was so damaging, so harmful for society. So I think that the war on drugs is first putting all drugs in the same pocket, which is a mistake. And it's, I have another story, very briefly. I wrote this story saying how many people in Juarez has been killed by overdose in 5 years. It was just 50 people. How many people has been killed by the war on drugs?
Wow.
10,000 people. So the approach is certainly wrong. So I think it should be another approach. And this country has to do with that.
Wow.
A lot to do with
Good.
that.
Hi, my name is Faith, and thanks for the great speech tonight. My question is, it's really sad to find out there are so little changes despite all the sacrifices of journalists in Mexico. But out of all that, I want to believe there will be one positive change that the journalist has made by exposing these criminals and injustices. If there's one, what would it be?
I I'm sorry, I got lost. I couldn't hear you.
Simpler, the sound is not good up here, so it needs to be
Okay.
very clear.
What do you think the one positive change that journalists have made through these exposures?
One positive change journalism made.
We journalists want positive change that we...
by exposing those
What
criminals.
positive change did all this journalism make in the situation?
I think that we send this message that we're still here. The country has these brave journalists, because it was not just me, it was a lot of reporters. The whole reporters in Juarez, like 100 reporters working daily. And I think that we send this message of courage and being committed to what you think is the right thing to do. And I think we pretty much succeed in that.
Maybe the opposite of impunity.
Yeah,
Like maybe we would make an international T-shirt that would say impunity with a red slash through it. Right, because you're holding them accountable even if the government won't.
exactly. And we're trying, but yeah, I said once that we were sending this message of resistance. And a lot of the society was feeling identified with us, working as journalists despite all this risk, etc.
Good.
Hi, thank you for being here. I just wanted to ask you something in regards to the Fast and Furious scandal that's been going on here. Have you ever drawn a parallel between the cartels you worked with in relation to the Fast and Furious scandal as supplying the weapons? And if so, do you feel that the United States, by being the second largest supplier of weapons, has helped to perpetuate the violence?
Yes, in two senses. I was telling this afternoon that the Mexican government is found very useful to blame this country for the flow of guns. But I found that Mexican government doesn't seize any gun in the border, which is our responsibility. So you cannot blame this country for the guns that are being imported without any care from the Mexican's border customs institution. But if you have heard of this Fast and Furious program, it happens that the vast majority of those guns end up in Juarez. And so I think there is but again, these weapons cross the border into my country without any Mexican official watching. So it's a shared responsibility, but I don't like to blame this country for all what is wrong in Mexico, because that gives Mexican governments the chance to get rid of the responsibility. So I don't know if I answered.
Yes, thank you.
You mentioned that you were on hit lists and people were threatened to your life. How come you didn't try to protect any kind of anonymity, or why didn't you use a pseudonym or try to protect your identity? Why did you and other journalists report under your own name?
How?
Why? Why did you not try to hide your identity?
Why didn't you try to hide your identity?
I'm sorry, I'm not listening properly. Why I didn't try to protect myself? Well, I tried, but I was being very careful. I was being the most careful, and I was writing in order to... I was trying this kind of measures, like if I write about the Sinaloa Cartel guys, in the same story, I'm gonna write about the Juarez Cartel guys. Not all the time, because sometimes you don't have like the same focus on the story, but I was trying to write in such a way that they may know that it's nothing personal. It's just my work. If they kill me, well, but I was being the most careful that I could, trying to confirm everything, not trying, but confirm every data and not being disrespectful in any way with anybody.
Why didn't you go incognito? No name on your stories.
Well, many stories
hide who you are.
Okay, this story doesn't have name. The other does, because I was very proud of the story, and I was like, this is something that we should publish. But I was trying to protect myself the best that I could, knowing that if somebody decided to kill me, there was no way to stop it.
So we talk in the news literacy class about 3 characteristics of journalism: verification, independence, trying to deal with both sides, and accountability.
Right.
When you don't have your name on the story, what's the danger?
Your name?
If you don't have your name on the
Your name?
story, what's the danger of that?
Well, my colleagues hated me. For the other story of the guys of the structure of the Sinaloa Cartel, they were like, how come you wrote this without name? They might, Sandra, put your name on it. Because they felt that,
They might get killed instead of you.
they were, the guy, well, it wasn't specifically one guy. We ran the story, obviously without the name because they were very dangerous. They are. And the guy that was covering the state attorney office came to me and said, Sandra, I think that you should put your name on it because you are risking us all. I was like, she said, I haven't thought this.
Hi. Firstly, thank you for your time tonight. But as you know, I'm sure you know, the DEA, the American DEA, has allowed the Sinaloa Cartel to carry out business, quote, unimpeded in the U.S. in exchange for info on other rival gangs. So I would like to know, do you think this exchange in power is helping or hurting the cartel?
I think it's pretty much hurting because this is not the first time that I have information about some American officers letting these Sinaloa Cartel guys get along, go back to Mexico after share information, because at least in El Paso, there is some evidence pointing at officers that were interviewing some of these guys in order to make arrests in the other side.
In the other gang.
In the other gang.
In the Juarez.
In the Juarez cartel. And I think that's pretty, if you know that somebody's committing a crime, you should stop it. And there is a lot of controversy against ICE, but not for this war, but for another story like took place in 2004. There was an informant from the Juarez cartel sharing information with ICE officers.
ICE is immigration
and
customs.
Enforcement. And there is this allegation and there is a suit against ICE of the family of some victims because the family says ICE knew that these killings were taking place in Juarez and they didn't stop it. So I think it's very harmful.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi. Recently, I've actually, for this past year, been talking about this with other journalists now that I'm a major, and I've been wondering, since a lot of people think about going to dangerous places like you have to report, and it's not an easy thing. It's terrifying, and I was just wondering if you had any advice for people thinking about doing that.
I'm a local reporter, and I covered a city that I knew, which is very helpful, and I felt confident in many places, in many aspects, because I knew the city. I think it will be irresponsible from my part telling you some advice that doesn't apply to other places like Afghanistan or something, because I haven't gone those places. I would say that you have to be the most objective that you can. And this is something that may be useful for everybody. There are some stories that I didn't write or I didn't pursue because something in my stomach was just like, don't. And that's kind of a sense of preservation instinct. And I trust that. But I don't know if it's helpful for any situation, but I'm sorry. I just cover Juarez. I don't have any idea how to cover Iraq or Afghanistan or Venezuela, unfortunately.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for coming. It was wonderful hearing you speak. But you mentioned that you like to remain very realistic in your reporting, and like you're just content with telling the story and putting it out there. But have you ever imagined a world where your stories did make that change in your country and there were like improvements or the country just became better? Have you ever imagined that you'd have that effect?
I think that the fact that I was very concerned about impunity and trying to explain how impunity works in this chaos of war, etc., that resonates in a lot of people. And my hope will be that that leads to some power, people in power to address the problem that we have with impunity. And the idea that everybody thinks about impunity now in my country, like everybody's pointing at this data, like a big structural problem that is sustaining or is fueling this violence. It's, I don't know if it is a change, but at least it's giving society elements to think about how the problem is.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi. Since February of last year, there are a few towns in the Michoacan province, just west of Mexico City, that have formed self-defense groups
All right.
that fight against the Knights of the Templar cartel. Right now, they have been somewhat successful in the past year. Would you have papers across Mexico, like newspaper outlets, to promote their stories, to show the Mexican people that if you do want change, you should take it into your own hands?
No, but I see with a lot of concern that vigilante groups, because difference that with this country in Mexico, nobody can have a gun. It's like illegal. And if we have these vigilante groups armed, that means that all these people is breaking the law.
Yeah.
And you cannot impose the rule of law by breaking the law. And I was so impressed and angry when I saw that the Mexican government is like acknowledging these groups. It's like, so basically the state is quitting its responsibility to provide security to the nation, and that's the end of the state for me, and it's for no reason is allowable. And if they are, I mean, the other story will be, start a revolution, but they are not doing that. They are just protecting themselves, which is speaking about the lack of protection from the state. It's like a jungle.
But wouldn't that point out the problem that the state is not protecting? I'm sorry if I asked a follow-up question.
We'll solve the problem by creating another problem. I'm totally against, personally, I would love to cover that story. And the first question that I will ask to these people is, how in the world they got these guns? How do you have an AK-47? Because it's totally illegal to have an AK-47 in Mexico.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jimin Kim. How much do you hold America accountable for what's happening in Mexico?
I'm sorry?
Yeah, there you go.
Hi, my name is Jimin Kim, and my question is how much you hold America accountable for what's going on in Mexico, America being proven to be the main consumer of the cartel's drugs, accusations of the U.S. government supplying the cartel with an arsenal of weapons. How do you feel about this?
Well, again, I haven't reported in this country. I may know about the politics of this country, but I'm not an expert. Or I don't know this country as I know mine. And of course, there is a hemispheric dimension to the problem. The war on drugs is an American decision. But it was the Mexican government who accepted to launch this war. So as a Mexican reporter, writing in Mexico, working in Mexico, I will be focusing my government because that's the territory that they should be controlling. And if I were here, I will be, of course, looking who is behind this, who is so interested in maintaining this war on drugs that is such a failure.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you for coming tonight. We had mentioned before that most of the reporters are women in Mexico, Do you think that being a male reporter is actually harder to do?
What, the last part?
Is it harder being a man as a reporter in Mexico?
A man?
Yeah.
Well, my experience was that it was really harder for them to cover the army, for instance, because the soldiers were really aggressive with them. And for some reason, they were most respectful. I mean, like in the physical level, like in a checkpoint, I had to rescue my colleague because he was already fighting with the soldier because he was taking photos, and and the soldier were more intimidating with the camera, so they were more aggressive with guys. But
what happens when that changes? What happens when that changes? Like, at what point do the security forces start saying, women, you don't get a free pass anymore, we're going to be just as aggressive with you as we are with men?
Well, they were aggressive in some other ways. I mean, not physically, obviously. They were more aggressive physically with the reporters, male reporters, but at the end they were aggressive with the whole media. For instance, I was covering these stories about how the federal government was arresting just people from the Juarez cartel. And when I asked the military guys, the general, we're supposed to have like two sides in the conflict, the Sinaloa Cartel and the Juarez Cartel. Why are you arresting just this side? And he basically said, you know, Sandra, I think that you don't work for El Diario. I think that you might be working for these people. And he told this to the state attorney, to everybody, and he told this to El Diario. He came to El Diario saying, I think that reporter is very suspicious. But El Diario were like, Sandra, no. Forget about it. Thank you.
Good evening. I know we cited some of the ways the cartel maintain their power by using brutality and corruption, but they also garner a massive amount of money, as we can see from the Forbes list. And some people would blame that on our policy, forcing the supply of drugs to be made in Mexico, but some more cynical people would say it was our demand, our appetite for these drugs that would perpetuate what's going on. So how much do you agree with that it's the people who are the problem, not the government?
Of course, there is a demand, and that's why the business is so big. Of course, there is a demand. But there is also a demand of Coca-Cola, which, by the way, is killing more Mexicans than any other thing, because the first cause of death in Mexico after homicide is diabetes, because we are the biggest consumer of Coca-Cola. I'm not trying to say this, but I'm trying to say that that's what I think, that the approach should be different. Nobody can stop a business that has this demand to begin with, without doing anything to control the demand, which is the case in Mexico. I don't know what's going on here with the demand. And that is so profitable. And that's what I think, that the approach should be different, like it was in the 20s with the alcohol.
So here's what I want to say. First of all, let's thank Sandra, and then we've got a couple of announcements. But thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dan. Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad.
Really good. Really good.